There is a man in this story who has everything, and it is killing him. He commands armies. He wins wars. Kings listen when he speaks, but somewhere beneath his armor, something is eating through him that no military rank can stop, no royal favor can fix, and no amount of gold can buy away. And the only person in the entire story who knows how to help him is a girl with no name, no country of her own, and no power over anything. That contrast is what this story is actually about. We are walking through 2 Kings chapter 5 today, and also a moment in Luke chapter 4 where Jesus references this same story in a way that gets him nearly thrown off a cliff. Both texts are pointing at something that is easy to miss if you read too quickly. So we are going to slow down, look at the details, and let the story breathe. Let us start with the man himself. Naaman is a general, not a minor one. He serves the king of Aram, which is the nation we would locate today in the region of modern Syria, centered around the city of Damascus. In ancient Near Eastern terms, Aram was a significant military power during this period, and Naaman was its top commander. The text in 2 Kings 5 describes him in a very specific way. It calls him a great man and says he was held in high favor by his master, that he was a mighty warrior. Then, almost immediately, the text adds one more detail. He had leprosy. Now, it is worth pausing here to say that the Hebrew word used, which is zaraat, does not necessarily map perfectly onto what we today call leprosy or Hansen's disease. It referred more broadly to serious skin conditions, some of which could be severe and debilitating. In the cultural context of the ancient Near East and within Israelite law specifically, it also carried significant social and ritual implications. It was the kind of condition that made a person untouchable in both a physical and a ceremonial sense. So here is this man who is powerful, celebrated, and feared, and he is carrying something that isolates him. Something that, despite all his power, he cannot command away. That is a tension almost anyone can feel, even if the specific circumstances are very different. Status does not protect a person from the things that hollow them out. And this story begins right in that gap between what Naaman appears to be and what he privately is dealing with. Now, here is where the story takes a turn that many readers move past too quickly. There is a girl in Naaman's household. She is described as a young girl who had been taken from the land of Israel. The text does not give her a name. It does not give her a backstory beyond that one detail. She was taken in one of the Aramean raids into Israelite territory, which means she was a captive, a servant, likely separated from her family and living in a foreign country with no legal standing and no real freedom. She serves Naaman's wife. That is the extent of what we know about her position. And yet this girl, this unnamed and displaced person, is the one who speaks the first word of hope in the entire story. She says to her mistress that there is a prophet in Samaria who could cure Naaman of his condition. She is talking about Elisha. Notice what she is not doing. She is not demanding acknowledgement. She is not requesting anything in return. She is not even speaking directly to Naaman. She makes her statement quietly, to his wife, and that small voice sets the entire story in motion. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. A captive girl from the very people her master's nation had been raiding is the one who points toward healing. She had every reason to stay silent. She had every reason to feel that her words would not matter or would not be heard. But she speaks anyway, and her words carry the story forward. This is one of those moments where the text shows something important about how hope moves. It does not always come from the expected direction. It does not always arrive through official channels or from people with credentials and platforms. Sometimes it comes from someone with no visible power at all. When Naaman hears this, he goes to his king. The king of Aram writes a letter and sends Naaman south with silver and gold and changes of clothing, essentially a significant payment, toward Israel. The letter goes to the king of Israel rather than directly to Elisha. This is an important detail. In the ancient world, transactions of this significance went through official channels. You did not go directly to a prophet. You went to a king. The king of Israel, when he reads the letter, tears his clothes. This was a visible gesture of distress. He interprets the letter as a political trap, an impossible demand that no one could fulfill, designed to start a conflict. He says something like, "Am I a god that I can cure diseases?" He sees this as provocation. Elisha hears about the king's distress and sends word. He tells the king to send Naaman to him. He wants to show Naaman that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman arrives at Elisha's house with his horses and his chariots. He is arriving with the full weight of his status visible around him. He is a general. He has traveled a significant distance. He has a royal letter. He has a chest of payment ready, and Elisha does not come out. This is the moment that many readers rush past. Instead of appearing at his door and greeting this powerful foreign military leader with ceremony, Elisha sends a messenger out to him. The messenger delivers a simple, almost mundane instruction. Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times, and your skin will be restored, and you will be clean. That is it. No incantation, no ceremony, no laying on of hands, no dramatic prayer. Just go wash in that particular river 7 times. Naaman is furious. The text is very clear about this. He was angry and he went away. His expectation had been completely unmet. He had imagined a certain kind of encounter. He tells his servants what he expected. He thought that Elisha would at least come out and stand before him, call on the name of his God, wave his hand over the diseased skin, and heal it properly. He expected the visual weight of a miracle, something befitting his status. And then Naaman says something that gives you a real window into his thinking. He points out that the rivers back home in Damascus, the Abana and the Pharpar, are much better rivers than the Jordan. Could he not wash in those and be clean? And he turns and walks away in a rage. This is the real turning point of the story, and it deserves a slow look. Naaman's problem in this moment is not stubbornness for its own sake. His problem is that the remedy looks beneath him. The Jordan was not an impressive river by ancient standards. It was not a grand ceremonial waterway. For someone from Damascus, which sat near cleaner and fuller rivers fed by snowmelt from the mountain ranges to the north, the Jordan could easily seem unremarkable or even muddy by comparison. And Naaman cannot reconcile his expectation of a grand cure with the instruction to splash around in an ordinary river. He expected the miracle to match his status. When it did not, he almost walked away from it. If this helps Scripture feel clearer, subscribe for calm Bible explainers like this. We release new videos regularly, and the whole goal is to make the biblical text more accessible, one story at a time. Now back to the river. Here is where Naaman's servants do something quietly remarkable. They approach him carefully. One of them speaks. The servant says something like, "If the prophet had told you to do something difficult, you would have done it. Why not do this simple thing?" It is a gentle question, but it lands. If the instruction had been painful, costly, or dramatic, Naaman would have done it without complaint. He was a warrior. He was accustomed to difficulty. But the instruction was simple, and the simplicity itself felt like an insult. The servant's logic cuts through that. The difficulty is not the point. The healing is the point, and Naaman listens. He goes down to the Jordan. He dips 7 times, just as Elisha's messenger had said, and the text describes the result in a very specific way. It says his skin was restored like the skin of a young child, and he was clean. That phrase, like the skin of a young child, is a striking image. It is not just that the disease went away. Something was returned to him that was fresh and whole. There is something in that image that carries more than a physical description. Naaman goes back to Elisha. This time, Elisha does come out, and now the encounter happens face to face. Naaman stands before this man who refused to come out the first time, and says that he now knows there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. He offers payment. He wants to give Elisha the silver and gold and clothing he brought. Elisha refuses to take any of it. He will not take payment for this. Naaman then makes 2 quiet requests before he leaves. He asks for 2 mule loads of soil from Israel, because he intends to build an altar on Israelite ground and worship Israel's God on it, even while living back in Aram. And he asks for something else. He asks that the Lord would forgive him in advance for the moments when, in his official role, he accompanies the Aramean king into the temple of Rimmon, the Aramean god, and must bow there because his king is leaning on his arm. He is essentially saying, I will have to do this as a matter of duty, but please let it be known that my heart will not be in it. Elisha's response to both requests is simple. Go in peace. That is the end of Naaman's story in 2 Kings 5, and it is a remarkable ending. A foreign military commander, a man from a nation that was actively raiding and harassing Israel, walks away from this encounter changed. Not because he found the most powerful prophet and demanded a miracle that matched his status, but because he listened to a captive girl, followed a simple instruction he found humbling, and washed in an ordinary river. Now we need to talk about Luke 4. Jesus is in Nazareth, his hometown. He has just read from the scroll of Isaiah in the synagogue, a famous passage about the Spirit of the Lord anointing someone to proclaim good news to the poor, freedom to captives, sight to the blind. He applies that passage to himself. The room is initially amazed at his words, but then the atmosphere shifts. Jesus begins to anticipate what they are thinking. They want him to do in Nazareth what he has been doing in Capernaum. They want the hometown crowd to get the benefit of whatever power or favor he seems to carry. And Jesus pushes back. He points to 2 stories from Israel's own history to make his point. The first is Elijah and the widow of Zarephath. The second is Elisha and Naaman. He says this, there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. This sentence alone is almost enough to cause a riot. The people in the synagogue were descendants of Abraham, members of the covenant community. And Jesus is saying, look at your own scriptures. When God's healing came in Elisha's day, it went to a Syrian outsider, not to the people who expected it, not to those who had the longest claim to it. The reaction in Luke 4:28 says they were filled with rage. They drove him out of the city and tried to throw him off a cliff. Notice what Jesus is doing with the Naaman story. He is not using it to shame anyone. He is using it to illustrate something consistent in how grace moves. It does not always land where people expect it to. It did not land on the powerful and well-positioned Israelites who might have assumed they were first in line. It landed on the outsider, the foreign general with a skin condition, who almost walked away from it because it looked too simple. Jesus seems to be saying that this is not a glitch in the system. It is the pattern. The people in the Nazareth synagogue hear that as a rebuke, but it can also be heard as an invitation, depending on where you see yourself in the story. Let us pause here and look at the full arc of what has happened. A powerful man has a problem he cannot fix with power. An unnamed girl with no standing speaks one sentence of hope. A prophet refuses ceremony and gives a simple instruction. The powerful man almost rejects the simple instruction because it does not feel serious enough. A servant speaks a gentle word of logic. The man chooses humility over expectation. He is healed. He walks away, changed, grateful, and carrying 2 mule loads of soil from a foreign land so he can worship on it. Every reversal in this story is deliberate. The one who sees clearly is the captive. The one who is healed is the foreigner. The one who refuses payment is the prophet. The one who almost misses it entirely is the man with all the advantages. This is one of the most human stories in the entire Hebrew Bible. And it is human in a way that does not require a particular religious background to feel. Most people have experienced the version of Naaman's problem where the solution to something real and painful in your life looks too small, too ordinary, too beneath what you thought the answer should look like. You expected something dramatic, something that matched the weight of what you were carrying. And instead, the path forward looked embarrassingly simple. And that simplicity itself felt like an insult. The unnamed girl does not know that her small sentence changes everything. Naaman's servant does not know that his one question turns his master around. Elisha does not perform the miracle in person. He sends a message. He stays inside. The whole story seems designed to strip away every layer of expectation about how healing is supposed to look. And Jesus in Luke 4 specifically chooses this story when he wants to explain something about where grace tends to go. He is not quoting it as an obscure trivia point. He is reaching for it as an example of something consistent and foundational. The people who are furthest from the center of expectation, the outsiders, the foreign nationals, the ones who have no claim on priority, are often the ones who receive what the insiders miss, precisely because they have fewer assumptions about how it is supposed to arrive. This is not a comfortable teaching. It was not comfortable in the Nazareth synagogue either, but it is also not a pessimistic one. Naaman is healed. The story does not end in failure. It ends with a changed man standing at a riverbank with fresh skin and a new understanding of where real power comes from. The point is not that the powerful are automatically excluded. The point is that the path through pride is narrow, and most of us have to be talked into taking it by someone we initially dismiss. For anyone watching this who feels like they are on the outside of religious life, who maybe did not grow up in church, who feels like they do not know enough or have not been in the right places, or do not have the right background to receive whatever it is the text is talking about, this story speaks directly to you. The Bible text shows repeatedly that the people who are assumed to be furthest from the center are often the ones the story is most concerned with. The unnamed girl matters. Naaman's servant matters. The Jordan River, unremarkable as it is the place where the healing actually happens. You do not need the impressive version of the experience. You may need the ordinary one. Now, for a practical takeaway that is grounded in what the text actually shows. Pride can reject mercy because it looks too simple. That is the lesson Naaman almost taught himself the hard way. His expectation of a dramatic cure, something worthy of a man of his standing, was almost the thing that kept him unhealed. He was not a bad man. He was not evil. He was just carrying assumptions about what healing was supposed to look like, and those assumptions nearly cost him everything. This is worth sitting with. When something in your life feels stuck, when a path forward exists but seems too small or too ordinary or too lacking in ceremony, it is worth asking whether the obstacle is really the path, or whether it is the expectation you have built up about how the path should look. The Jordan River was not impressive. The instruction was not complicated. The prophet did not even come outside, and that was the whole point. There is a version of this that applies to how people approach faith itself. Many people are waiting for an experience that matches the weight of what they are carrying. A dramatic moment, an undeniable sign, something that feels appropriately serious. And the story of Naaman suggests that the thing being offered may look like a muddy river with a simple instruction attached to it. The question the story leaves open is the same question Naaman's servant asked him. If it had been something hard, you would have done it. Why not this simple thing? Before we close, there is one more detail worth noting about the structure of 2 Kings 5 that gets overlooked in most retellings. The chapter does not end with Naaman. After Naaman leaves, a subplot appears involving Elisha's servant Gehazi, who runs after Naaman and lies to him to collect the payment that Elisha had refused. Gehazi's deception leads to him receiving Naaman's leprosy as a consequence. It is a sharp contrast. Naaman came to Israel as an outsider and left healed. Gehazi was an insider who behaved with the opposite spirit and left with what Naaman had arrived with. The chapter is built around that reversal. The outsider enters, humbles himself, and leaves whole. The insider uses position for personal gain and leaves marked. It is the kind of structural contrast that biblical authors used intentionally. And it reinforces the same theme the entire chapter has been building. Outsider or insider is not primarily a matter of where you were born or what your background is. It is a matter of posture. Naaman came in as an outsider by every external measure. But when he finally listened and humbled himself and went down to that river, his posture became the kind the story rewards. Gehazi had proximity to the prophet, familiarity with the work, and an insider's position. But his posture in that moment was one of using access for advantage. And the story treats those two postures with very different outcomes. That is the final turn of the knife in this story. And it is the part that connects most directly to what Jesus was pointing at in Luke 4. The question is never really about who you are before you arrive. The question is what you do when the instruction looks too simple for your expectations. Here is the question to leave you with, and I would genuinely love to see your thoughts in the comments. Is there something in your own life right now that might actually be the simple instruction you have been talking yourself out of because it does not feel important enough to be the real answer? You do not have to have a religious framework to think about that question. Naaman did not have one when the story started either. If this kind of slow, careful look at biblical stories is useful to you, explore more of the Scripture Unfolded library. We have other videos walking through stories just like this one, where the character you overlooked turns out to be the one the whole story was about.